So this is the second one of these. If anybody is listening or watching and you didn't catch the first one, you should go back and watch that or listen to that. Also, if you don't have a copy, you should buy the book. So, been coming through some hard times by Jack Glazier.
Oh, we're supposed to show.
Well, you didn't have to show. I was
Okay.
We just want to be like you.
But it's not that he sat there and said, "Hey guys, talk about my book." We don't technically have we don't own rights to the book or anything.
We're not getting paid for this.
We're not. What we're doing is we already did the book study as a group.
Right.
And again, the idea was just as we talked about this in the community, especially I was noticing when I was talking with people about it, they kept saying, "I would love to hear what pastors have to say about that book." And so the idea is, all right, let's talk about it where people can watch.
That's awesome. Because it's funny because they don't really tell. I want to hear what you say about the Bible, but they want to hear what we say about the book.
Because it's almost like they know we don't have to tell you that. You're going to tell me what you think about the Bible.
True.
So
Every Sunday.
yeah,
all year long.
and you're going to tell me I should pay you to hear what you have to say about the Bible.
Touche.
Not so much, but carry on.
Yeah.
So we are in chapter 1, and chapter 1 now is called. Was that race and usable past?
From the county and the town.
Yes. So, you guys, either of you, what is something that you wanted to talk about in this chapter from anywhere in it?
Anywhere. So to me, I mean, the geographical location of where we're at, I think, is significant historically. It's significant to where we are today. Things that I picked up, I've only lived in this community for a little over 2 years, but quickly identifying how the agricultural nature and historical value of this community is significant, not only, and it speaks about this in the book, but not only now, but nationally, not only locally, but nationally, it's important. And historically, it's been important because I think 3%, this really kind of stuck out, 3% of the national tobacco product is from Christian County.
Yeah.
That's massive when you consider how much tobacco is produced here. Like currently, we're known as the batter capital of the world.
Yes, which is hilarious because we really could be the tobacco. Especially the black tobacco.
Yeah.
You can't say black, but.
Yeah, you can't. You just did. Ooh.
Dark fired.
Dark fire.
Black.
Yeah. And, and even in there, they said they call it that because maybe it was the hands that actually, harvest it.
Yeah.
That may have been one of the reasons why it does have a darker color than your traditional, I forgot the name of the other one, but that dark fire, dark patch tobacco is what this area is known for because it's really one of the only places in the country and world here in a little bit part of northern Christian County or Montgomery County in Tennessee produces this, which they said is good for snuff, like chewing tobacco, but also for cigars and things like that as well.
Yeah. No, it is interesting because so I've been reading, Wendell Berry. I'm slogging through that book. It's a big book and it's good. But when he talks about this importance of agrarian life and then the separation of the value of the laborers and the labor. It is interesting how important this area is for what it produces and yet how it has treated the human beings who are responsible for the production of it.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think you see that historically, but you also see that carrying over into the present day as well.
Yeah.
Where we do separate the place from the people and we do separate the laborer from the labor. And I think what impressed me about this chapter in particular, I've never seen another book, I mentioned this last time, but I've never seen another book that goes this deep into one space.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that as our world gets increasingly global, as we are aware of what's happening in Ukraine right now, we're aware of things that are taking place a world away.
Yeah.
It becomes even more important that we not forget where we're at.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that we really zone in on a place.
Yeah.
Kamarr, you preached about this Sunday, right?
Yeah.
This is that idea of, hey, know where you're at and invest.
Embrace it.
Yeah.
Embrace it.
Yeah.
And not only where
That was
we're
actually
at.
your exact quote.
Yeah.
And not only where we're at, but the history behind where we're at, that it didn't just, we didn't wake up and, this year and things are just the way they are for no reason.
Yeah.
One of the things that also stuck out is the amount of slavery that took place in this community in times past.
Yeah.
Kentucky was a Union state, but it was a slave state. And I guess if you compare the entire state, it wasn't as significant as other locations. But when you focus and zoom in on Christian County, the amount of slaves and the percentage of slaves versus the rest of the population of the county, it's enormous. I think one of the kind of references is that it rivals other communities in the Deep South.
Yeah.
This community had more slaves than anywhere else in Kentucky. I mean, it says the average across the state says Kentucky slave owners held on average 5.8 slaves in 1860. But by contrast, the ratio of slaves to owners in Christian County in 1860 was 10.16.
Yeah.
So you see twice as many slaves in this community as anywhere else in the state, which is higher than you look at places like in Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee, and even Virginia.
Yeah.
So you're talking about it's on par with places like Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia.
Yeah.
So there was a huge amount of population to the point of it says that slaves constituted 46% of the county's total population back then.
Yeah. And you see, and what's something we're going to see as we move more into the book is how that's played out even now, where Hopkinsville has the largest percentage of black people in the state. Maybe not numbers because Louisville is a bigger city. That is true.
Right.
But percentage wise, this is the blackest place in the state.
You know, what's interesting about that is that the population hasn't changed.
Yeah.
I mean, you think this is 1860 and there's 20-something thousand people, and you look at the numbers today, and it's like 29, almost 30,000 people. So there's not much growth. There's not much change, but the percentages of the demographics are almost roughly the same.
Exactly.
Which to be honest, I just think that's weird for some reason. I don't know why, but it's just weird.
Well, that's why I like this book, because I've always felt it was weird. And I feel like by the end of this book, now I understand, like, I kind of know, I get it. I get why it is more. It still feels weird, and I have all kinds of emotions about it, but it makes more sense. Like, I can find something to be not good, but still logical. That's something I was wrestling with my wife about that last night, saying, like, I like to understand what's the logic behind it, because everybody does something for a logical reason. I might not agree with their logic, but people do what they think makes sense.
Right.
And so we come in here as outsiders, we're like, this doesn't make sense. Why is it like this? Who would ever think of doing it like this?
Yeah.
And this book is just one of the pieces of the puzzle. It's like, okay, I still don't think this makes sense.
Yeah.
I still don't understand why they're doing it like this, but I actually do kind of understand why you're doing it like this.
You know what I love about this book and the way we're talking about it? It's kind of like a crime scene investigation, that we're walking up on like a murder scene in like somebody's bedroom, and they're like, why did this happen? And we're like going through the drawers, like, oh, maybe that's why it happened.
Oh, did you read her diary? Which is in this chapter.
I was just going to say, we're going to talk about that diary.
I do want to, one thing that I had underlined from the first page, I didn't necessarily turn this page over, but I do think this is kind of important, because a lot of people say, you know, I don't know if you've been asked this question, Richard, and you might have been asked this as well, Brandon, to be honest, even though you are white, that is true. But
there's nothing wrong with that.
You still might have been asked this question. I've been asked of, you know, why is this history so important? Why does Black history matter? Why can't we just have American history? Why can't we just move on? And he says here, he says, for Black people in particular, locating a usable past has been vital in promoting self-esteem, mutual respect across the divide of race, and inclusion, both in civic affairs and in the public discourse. And I just want to put that out there and just say,
good.
I think that's a great, almost like him sitting and saying, hey, I'm doing this because for some people, and this may not be your life experience, you may not understand this, but for persons of color, there is this need, and to borrow Wendell Berry's phrase, the need to be whole, right? There's this need to actually have an understanding, and knowing history, studying these things as particular and detailed as they might get at times. There are things that are missing that help people feel like they're a part of the society.
Yeah.
And Glazier pulls that out in this chapter. It was very helpful for me, somebody who's interested in history.
Yeah.
I've done some reading, not a ton, but just about the philosophy of history.
Yeah.
And he talks about how our approach has so often been this contributionism, this contributivist approach to Black history in particular, as he's concerned with it. And he's trying to, and we've talked about this before, he's trying to say, well, it's not just, oh, you've got a Black guy over here making some contribution. Like, you can't understand the history. You've turned to the page.
I think that is the page, isn't it?
Yeah, you've got this history that you can't separate.
Right.
The impact from all of these different cultures, as he talks about it, you know, all these different cultures coming together producing history, and you can't just say, "Oh, this is a contribution from this one." No, it's all
history.
It's all history. It's all wrapped up together.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Which one did you got a quote?
I was like, because I know I did. Well, so that one was the page before. I was like, maybe I won't talk. But since you brought it up, I mean, he's as Black History Month, each February is a continuing reminder that the contributionist view remains popular, lauding as it does admirable Black figures in the American past. And yeah, so he's talking about that, of saying that is the main way we approach Black history. Let's look at these exceptional individuals. This guy, look at him stand up, and that's not necessarily wrong to say this is a great person, but he's saying it's almost like, if you can't tell me what this Black person did to make the world better, then they're not a part of history worth talking about.
Right.
Or make it worse. Like either they're either the negative stereotype or the positive stereotype. But if they don't fit the stereotypes, then we don't want to hear their story.
Or and I'm sorry, Richard.
No. Go ahead.
But the other thing is that it doesn't. We can ignore it.
Yeah.
We can ignore the fact that there were Black people in America because white people owned them. Mm-hmm. We can ignore that because, look at these Black people doing some cool stuff.
Yeah.
Or we can ignore the impact that slavery has on the history.
Right.
Because, these people overcame it. Mm-hmm. Instead of saying, well, yes, but it's still an integral part of the story. We have to be able to deal with it. We have to wrestle with it. We can't just ignore it. And I think that's one of the things Glazier brings out here is our temptation, my temptation, is to take things that make me uncomfortable and not deal with them.
Yeah. Right.
Let's just pretend that didn't happen. Let's just gloss over that for a second.
Look over there.
Yeah. What's that?
Shiny.
Isn't that
cool? And I think just to highlight what you're saying a little bit more is it's hard to deal with history like this. When I'm looking at, in 1833, between 1830 and 1860, it says the growth of the slave population far outpaced that of the free population. And I'm starting to look at that, and it says, over the decades, it was, how much it grew. And I started to think the question, just pause there, like, why did it grow? And then I started to think, this was at the height of chattel slavery.
Yeah.
So this is breeding.
Yeah.
This is not a population growth because, husbands and wives and families are growing.
No.
And they're adding to the GDP and all this kind of stuff.
No.
And because of good old American family values, this is breeding. So if I have 10 hogs and I want to make more money, I'm going to put this situation together where they're going to breed more hogs. And more hogs bring me more money.
Yeah.
And so these are people, but they're property.
It's almost like we got to that point where we're now far enough removed from the transatlantic slave trade that we now have stabilized the gene pool of individuals who are best at surviving this torture, and now they can have a population explosion because we bred out all the people who just can't survive in this hell.
Right.
And
survival of the fittest.
And we're not bringing in any new people who need to be weeded through. So now we can perfect our breeding system and really take off.
Right. Which is, this sounds really bad, but it's.
I mean, we're talking. I mean, this is where Brandon's like, I'm going to be silent because they're talking about their ancestors, not me.
You talk about.
But this is our ancestors we're talking about.
This is agriculture, what we're talking about.
Yeah.
This is these people. This is agriculture.
Yeah.
This is no different than when you look at the Bible and it's like, okay, this guy wants to get married to this girl, but he's going to go work for Laban, and so he's going to manipulate.
But I got to get more goats. I'm going to do the speckled. I'm going to do the speckled.
I'm going to keep the big one. I'm going to keep the ones over here for me, and you can have them. So he's manipulating the gene pool.
Yeah.
That's what's happening to grow their income.
Yeah.
Yeah, you talk about a topic that makes me uncomfortable that I don't want to talk about. That would be one of them.
Yeah.
But also the importance then of talking about it and of saying, wait, why is this happening?
It's the thing that I will say medically. I've had these conversations, and I still do talk about it sometimes openly with my wife when we look at some of the medical disparities in the Black community. And I wonder how many of them are results of essentially that forced breeding that we went through as a people. Stuff like high blood pressure.
Yeah.
And I jokingly talk about how I don't drink water, right? And I do have high blood pressure now. I do. But
he's going to start drinking.
And you're like the healthiest Black person that I know.
No, I'm not gonna start drinking water any more than I have been. And one of the reasons why I say that is I talk about just the heritage of where we come from as far as African genes and desert life. And one of the theories I have, which is not proven at all, please don't take this as medical advice.
This is not your medical opinion.
This is me talking about what I've done with my own body. I say maybe the problem is we're overhydrated because we come from people who are meant to be less hydrated. and there's just so much hydration here.
Don't try this at home.
Just because of how the body works physiologically. Or like, looking at our diet and the idea there is too much sodium in the diet. There's so much meat in the diet. Looking at the idea of how we interact and even move in space. Just little I saw a crazy meme. Talking about social media, I saw a crazy meme. I do not agree with this meme, but it was a picture. You'll like this, Richard, of saying these are both examples of African libation culture. And one has a guy in a kente cloth in Africa, and he's pouring out a bowl of water on a graveyard. Another one has a guy with his 40 ounce pouring out of it.
That's so messed up.
But the idea was, it's in the blood. See, this is in the blood. This culture, and I'm like, okay, I don't agree.
Yeah.
But I see what you're again going back to what Glazier said. There's this longing for.
Yeah.
But what does it mean to be me? How much of this is my culture that's been stolen from me when we're going through these 400 years of forced breeding and indoctrination? What was left behind?
And you know what, just to go on that just a little bit, I've thought about that a lot. You've got 260 plus years of slavery or somewhere more of that before it was over. But think about this, you've got the worst possible diet that you can imagine. I mean, people are fed entrails and leftovers of parts of animals, and you're eating hog maws and pig feet and guts and all these kind of things for hundreds and hundreds of years over probably, a dozen generations.
Yeah.
What does that do to the human body?
Yeah.
As their genes are, fed this and adapt to this over time. And then you eloquently said, or not so much, but the majority of African Americans, it seems like, has high blood pressure as a normal medical condition.
Like I said, I was 38, 39 when I was done. I'm a relatively healthy guy. Like I just was remarking to my wife last night. I'm like, I don't think we cooked with meat at all this week, have we? Like, and it's Friday. Mm-hmm. That's how we eat. That's our normal way. Right. I mean, and still high blood pressure.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's like, when I came, I'm like, well, of course I'm black. Like that was my, like, if you had good, diet, normal activity, and you
had good diet and normal.
But I'm just saying, if you ate large amounts of fruits and vegetables, decent activity, and you were to go to a doctor and like, oh wow, your blood pressure is over 200, it was like 200 something over 100 something when it was diagnosed, you would say, oh man, and I say, I'm black, I knew this was coming.
Granddaddy had it, daddy had it. It's just, it kind of comes
just
with
a matter of time.
Yeah. It's like if you had sickle cell. Oh, well, I guess that's what we, what we do.
Yeah. Right. And this does help explain some of the things that we see similar to that in the culture here. One thing I did have is, it says here, middle of 22, it says, as in the rest of the country, diversity issues are more acknowledged than acted on in many venues, from the city council to churches to schools. 22, like the second paragraph, or the first new paragraph in there, that first sentence. So I was at school board meeting last night. We've all sat in different meetings and things like that here, and we've seen that, like, diversity. Oh man, we need to have diversity. What are we gonna do about it? We need to have diversity.
Yeah. If we had diversity, we could have more diversity.
Yeah. Let's do diversity.
Yeah, let's get some of that.
And it's like, and like you said,
let's put pictures of diversity, and diversity will come.
And then you say, well, let's do something about it. And here he is acknowledging, like, well, you can see this historically, that they just talk about it.
Yeah.
They just talk about it. That's sad.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Brandon?
Well, I think that in conversations that Kamarr and I have had, and I don't know if you and I have had them, it's a question of, sometimes it's not a lack of desire, it's a lack of knowing how to proceed.
Right.
And I think that at every inflection point culturally, there's a collective sense of this is not as it should be, right? And there's an agreement amongst a broad group of people, hey, this is not what we want. And so we learn the words to talk about it, and that conversation begins. I feel like we've learned the words, we've started talking about it, but there hasn't been an answer proposed yet. Which, to me, as a Christ follower, as a pastor, I'm like, this is the church's moment.
That's right.
Yeah.
Why aren't we stepping up?
It's our time to shine.
And then I realized, wait, I don't know the answer either.
Well, I think part of the answer then goes at the end of that paragraph. He talks about, at least with, again, we're talking Hopkinsville specifically, why is it like that here?
Right.
When you have 30 some odd percent, 40 some odd percent black people in the city, We find out later how they never had to fight for the right to vote, which still blows my mind. So they've always been enfranchised. Why don't you see this? And he talks about this idea of attracting the Europeans as that better class. And he closed off by saying, black people, not immigrants, were the true outsiders.
Exactly.
That always, especially here in Hopkinsville, you could say America, but we're talking Hopkinsville.
Right.
There's this perception of the real outsiders are the black people. Though they've been here for hundreds of years.
They're the outsiders.
They're the outsiders. But hey, you immigrant from any place else on the planet, you can come and you can be a part of this place. You're not an outsider. You're welcome.
Well, you think about this, though. How many years was it before the Native American was considered a U.S. citizen?
Yeah.
So you think about that. But, one of the things that really hit me about Hopkinsville is, there is a lot of diversity. It's one of the most diverse places in the state. We've talked about that. But there's been desegregation, but there really hasn't been integration.
Yeah.
It's like everywhere you go, that in the city, based on paper, there's a lot of demographical diversity, but it's not until you go to the certain pockets where those demographics live, that's when you see the diversity. It's not integrated at all. And I think what highlights it even more is when we look around the church, you're like, okay, we live in a community of 30% African American, but when we go into the churches, you see, 95% African American over here, 95% Caucasian. Why is that? And you've got the same population that's been here for over 150 years, but there hasn't been this seemingly gelling. There hasn't been this integration. It's still like a heterogeneous mixture that is never really emulsified into like a one people.
Somebody needs to pour some salt in that salad dressing. That's so if you're ever making homemade salad dressing, that's literally what that does. The salt comes in and it works as the emulsifier that says, I can disrupt those bonds in the oil and get it to work with that. And I also dissolve in the water. It's, man, if only somebody had come and died and rose again and called people to be salt in the community, that could solve this problem.
Who could that be?
Man, we need that
Novel
guy.
concept.
Yeah.
Novel concept.
Savior.
I don't want to distract from that, but I was like trying to keep up with Richard because you were using words that I didn't necessarily know, but good job. I was homeschooled. There are gaps in
and you can blame his teacher because he brags how he taught himself. He was like, I was homeschooled, and I got to choose my education.
That doesn't give me hope because we homeschool our kids. So
yeah, but you're doing a better job than I did, probably.
Doubtful.
But I like exactly what you said, right? Salt. What's salt supposed to do? We talk about salt as a preservative. We talk about salt as a flavoring. But this idea of salt being a catalyst for bringing together that which is different is an aspect that I don't think we've dealt with.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the time for the church. I think the trouble is we look at a problem that's bigger than we are. We look at a problem that's a community problem. It's a national problem. It's a global problem. And we were like, well, I don't know how to fix that over there. Yeah. And I think the message of the gospel is, well, you don't have to. You just start fixing your relationships. You start fixing the way that you approach the people who are different than you, the people who look different than you, that might share a different history than you. Approach them with humility. Approach them as a learner. Yeah. Approach them as a fellow image bearer. And that change, instead of being a top-down change, everybody's looking for top-down solutions. Yeah. Jesus comes along, he says, no, it's a bottom-up solution.
See, I think you have the bottom-up, but I think there is a top-down component because one of the other things that's truly interesting, so we talk about Hopkinsville, there is a large immigrant population here. There are a lot of people who would call Hopkinsville home, and they're first, maybe second generation. So we're going back, before end of slavery, history of this place, and it still looks like that. You have some families where they've been here since then.
Right.
But at least half of this city, they weren't here before the end of slavery. And so I think there must be some sort of top-down thing because there must be a system in place that is really good at getting the new people to buy into the old system. And that also needs to go. I think it needs to come from both directions.
Right. I completely agree because, when you look at Hopkinsville, the thing that really hits me off is that there are things in play, although we talked about it a minute ago, that are here that pre-existed us. So, for example, a couple of weeks ago, I was walking with a group of people downtown, and we stopped over at the Historical Society. And so it's right downtown, across the street from the museum. Went down there and walked in, had never been in there, trying to appreciate the downtown culture, trying to make sure it gets revitalized and all those kind of good things, appreciating the fact that there's business owners and things like that. So walk in there looking around, and they've got a lot of things, a lot of artifacts. And when I'm looking through, again, this is Christian County, downtown Clark, Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and I see multiple pictures of Robert E. Lee on the wall. And I look and I see one, a big frame picture, and it's Robert E. Lee in his dressed, Confederate uniform with a child sitting on his lap reading the Bible to this child. And then I look over and I see another picture of Robert E. Lee. And I look behind me, and yet again, there's another picture of Robert E. Lee. And then I started thinking, where's Ulysses S. Grant? Because we are a Union state.
Yes.
And so I started looking around, and I don't see one picture of Ulysses S. Grant. So I asked the lady who was there, who opened the door for us, I said, hey, where's Ulysses S. Grant? I'm like, oh, we don't have them. And I was like, well, why do we have all of these portraits of Robert E. Lee? She's like, oh, well, they were contributed.
Yeah.
They were donated.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes me think, as a Union state, we're glorifying our enemy who is on the wrong side of history, so to speak, in our community.
Yeah.
And this is the historical society.
And then you remember the stuff that Wallace said in her diary, like, oh, yeah, they were.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's like, okay, I think, and I know as a pastor, you guys, we all know, we know the gospel is the answer. We know that Jesus is the only one who can change the human heart. And at the same time, the gospel, the church has been in Christian County since these days, but there's still some systemic thinking that still has to be brought to light and confronted with truth so that change can happen as well.
Page 25, bottom page 25, with what you're talking about, what you saw over there at the Historical Society. Celebrations of the Confederacy and Southern heritage itself, a thinly shrouded, racialized idea. The display of Confederate emblems and the tending of monuments and historical markers commemorating Southern heroes brings slavery and racial nationalism into the present, exposing a yawning chasm of difference in perception and feeling between black people and proponents of Southern heritage. What you're describing right there, you walk in, and by virtue of the color of your skin and what all that has done, making you the man you are today, you walk in, you see that, you're like, this don't look right.
Right.
And everybody else is like, what you talking about? Everybody donated this. This looks beautiful. We took care of it.
Exactly.
And you're like, no.
Something's off with this. Like, what? I mean, they didn't have the Confederate flag, but I'm thinking, this doesn't look like Union territory.
Yeah.
This looks a lot like another team.
Yeah.
So it just made me think, okay, this is where we are. This is what we've got to deal with. And this is where some of the issues that Glazier points out are true. And even though this book was written several years ago, some of these mindsets still persist. And it also gives us great opportunity because we know that the gospel also has the power to reflect not only heart change, but community change as well. Yeah. We've talked about that before. You look at the book of Acts, you see the church in Antioch, you see all through the New Testament how a diverse community became united and the middle wall of separation was brought down because of the work that Jesus has done in the lives of people who who make up the church. And he can do that here
and even before them, in Exodus with the mixed multitude that goes with them, all the Levitical codes that says this is what you do when you have foreigners in your midst, how they can come and present their gifts to me and be in my presence. That was always a thing. I mean, but we've got to do better. Brandon, what do you have? This can't be two good black guys talking across a white guy show. So what do you got?
I was enjoying
that's
the tennis
an
match. I'm just back and forth. Well, so this idea in this chapter of a usable past, I think is one of the keys. And I think that's what you're getting at. When you're talking about walking into a Union territory, right, you would think that would be what you'd see. But you don't. And Wallace's diary that he deals with extensively here shows that you could be on the side of Union, but really be more aligned with Confederate values,
right,
when it came to some of the what we might call social issues.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, an integral part of this idea of how do we get a past that we can actually wrap our heads around as a community.
Right.
We're going to have to address, how does a Union place celebrate the Confederacy, and how does that impact it going down through the years? So I'm not explaining that very well, but this idea of that usable past, of being able to access that in a way that informs the dialogue that we're having with one another today.
Yeah.
Not just this dialogue, but the dialogue in the community.
Right.
We have to be able to deal with it. We can't just be silent on it.
That's right.
And it is going to be uncomfortable. So I think I would probably land in a different place when it comes to what do we do with these historical monuments?
Yeah.
Right? Do we blow them up?
That's my vote.
That's your vote.
I like them. I think we keep them, but I think we add more.
That's probably be where I would land more. Although I'm always ready with a match.
I know you're
Always ready
you're a
with a
bad
match.
friend for me. My continual complaint about you and our friendship is that you never say that's a bad idea, Kamarr. You probably shouldn't do that. You're always like, that sounds awesome. And I'm like,
do it.
I mean, I literally said, hey, I think I might, say some things that's going to be controversial, might cause some problem. Whatever.
But you know what's weird?
Gone.
You know what I find really weird? So just to give you a paint a picture. So in the south of where we are now is Tennessee. And so in Tennessee, there is a state park called Nathan Bedford Forest State Park that it's upkept by, state dollars, state tax revenue, things like that. But there's also a state park called Fort Pillow State Park, based on the Fort Pillow massacre, which we were talking about just a little bit earlier. So you've got diametrically opposed reasons why there's a state park, both funded by state dollars.
Yeah.
Now, bringing that back up to Kentucky, one of the things that we see, if you drive around all of Christian County, eventually you're going to run into this massive, 100-foot tall obelisk that is for the old president of the Confederacy.
Technically, it's in Todd County.
Is it? I thought it was in
It's
Christian
in
County.
Todd, but
it's right
when you
over
get to the edge of
Okay.
when you get towards the edge of Christian County, you can start to see it.
You can
'Cause it's
see
that
it
big.
from Christian County.
Oh yeah, you can.
Yeah, you can stand in the shadow of it almost. And so think about this for a sec. So there were the Daughters of the Confederacy. They raised a lot of money. It takes a lot of, I can only imagine how many dollars that would equate to in today's money to build something like that. Hundreds of thousands of dollars probably in today's money to build something like that. And you're dealing with people who had the means, had the resources, dedicated it because it was a passion project that they cared about. They accomplished the goal, and now it's a state park, and now it's being the revenue that's generated by mine and your tax dollars goes to the upkeep of that. And I think there's a reason why we should, so that we don't forget history. But at the same time, where we're located also constituted one of the highest populations of slaves. And we'll get into this much later, but because of Reconstruction, and because of the disparity, the poverty, there's not people collecting money for monuments of African American Union soldiers or anything like that, or even monuments of famous African Americans because of the poverty that's in this community. And so therefore, you don't have historical markers. You don't have historical place markers. You don't have monuments. You don't have huge, massive tombstones to represent history. And so that's why I think that it's not getting rid of historical places. I think we need additional historic places. And I don't have the knowledge of knowing how to get that, but I think that's one of the solutions to give the people of the community back their identity.
I just figured out what the mirror could be. We could just build a giant black obelisk 110 feet tall right next to it.
Or we just save money. We paint half of it black and we just change the name.
Look, I'll tell you, when I first learned about it, when I first saw it and learned about it, the thing that offended me wasn't so much at being to be honest, it offends me as a black man. It does. But originally, the original offense to me was it offended me as the son of veterans and as American, because you can't see it. And if you've been to the Washington Monument, and I've been there a couple of times, I think about 5 or 6 times I've been there in my life. If you've been there, you know for a fact they made a cheap knockoff of the Washington Monument in the name of the Confederacy. And so as a son of veterans and as an American, it offended me on that alone. I'm like, how dare you try and mock and make fun of and compare yourself to him?
Yeah, equate the first president of the Confederacy with the first president.
That was my initial offense. And then as time goes on, and I'm also angry as a black man. So that's grown. But my initial offense was what? No, that's not cool. We shouldn't be okay with that. Yeah. I thought we were good Americans here.
Well, and going back to a point before, it's it's almost like the things that are elevated in a community, those are the things that are most important. And so that's one of the highest things in our county. So that obviously
Todd
is
County.
something.
Okay.
That is Todd County.
Yes.
That is true.
Just because I don't want anybody to come out and throwing rocks at us over that.
Yeah,
there are plenty of things to throw rocks at me for, but not that one.
Throw rocks at Todd County if you don't like that, right? But not that there's anything wrong with Todd County. But when you look at the things that are around us, again, Todd County is in Kentucky.
Yeah.
Right? Hopkinsville is in Kentucky. Now, there's a part in this that's not really put in the book, but there was a point before we became a union state, we recognized ourselves as a neutral place. Yeah. We were neutral for a period of time, and then we decided that we were going to be a union place. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it seems like we have all the trimmings, and they even mentioned this in here, maybe in this this chapter, but we resembled more of a slice of the Deep South than we do a Union territory.
We feel more south than Tennessee, even though we're more north than them. Tennessee seceded, we did not.
Yeah.
And yet we feel more south than them.
That would be a great logo. We're more southern than Tennessee, even though we're more northern.
Yeah. Nah, too many words. You got to
yes. More southern than Tennessee.
More souther than you.
We're more souther than
you. Yeah, there you go. More souther than you.
I'm a little bit more country than that. There you go.
There you go.
Praise God.
So, Brandon, okay, I think this was one of the parts you want to talk about, right?
Yeah. So this idea that he's referencing these interviews, right, that took place in the community, and the statement, "We knew who our white people were." We knew who our white people were, and when you're referring to that, you're not talking about my white friend. No. Like you would hear me say my black friend.
Yeah.
Right. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about we knew who owned us.
Yeah.
We knew who.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never had to deal with that.
Yeah.
Praise God.
Right? I've never had to deal with that.
Technically, I haven't either.
Yeah.
True, but that this is living memory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We knew who our white people were.
Yeah.
And that has to impact. That has to impact that generation. That has to impact subsequent generations. That has to be a part of.
How do you think it did? Imagine that if you could. Imagine with me, if you will.
Yeah.
How does that? And how does that knowing that you were someone else's?
Yeah.
Right.
That your family was someone else's.
Right. Yeah, and that's I don't know that I can imagine it.
So I just got a message last week, or I just read the message last week. I think I got it before that through Ancestry, DNA stuff. A lady messaged me and saying, essentially, I saw your stuff on Ancestry. Your second great grandmother, my dad's great grandmother. You have her down as Catherine Richeé, but her maiden name was Higgs. I found this out through the slave records. More or less, she's saying my family owned your second great grandmother. Do you want some stuff that we have? I don't have pictures of her. I have some pictures of her sisters.
I want all the stuff. I want
and so when I saw my dad, I saw my dad, and I'm like, Dad, do you remember? I think it was this one. Catherine is like, yeah, I remember that. I'm like, well, I got a message from Ancestry about this, and so this is, and my dad saying well, yeah, that's about right. That she would have been a slave when she was born. This is my dad's great grandmother, and he's sitting there and he's thinking about it, and this is casual conversation on Mother's Day. My dad and I talking about, hey, got contact from a family that used to own our family, Dad.
Yeah, right. And that's what I'm saying. I don't think I can imagine what that would be like. I don't think I know what it would be to be walking around a community where I've been here as long as I can remember, and they've been here as long as they can remember.
Right.
And their family used to own my family. And the impact of that over the generations,
right?
I think it's even difficult to quantify.
Yeah.
That's just that statement. I told Kamarr, I said, that statement just stood out to me of, if you want to understand what's going on now, this is why this usable past is so important, is because we have to understand that has an impact.
It does.
Yeah.
That's going to influence future relationships.
In my hometown, I grew up in Savannah, Tennessee, which is in very rural West Tennessee, right on the Tennessee River, about 15 minutes above the Mississippi border and about 20 minutes away from the Alabama border. When I grew up, there was this place right by the river. It was called the Cherry Mansion. And so Brandon and I were talking about this previously. During the Civil War, the Battle of Shiloh, U.S. Grant stayed at the Cherry Mansion. Now, I have relatives that used to serve in the Cherry Mansion. Matter of fact, my family tree that I've got, it starts with the cherries. And so we would walk around. I grew up and went to high school, middle school, elementary school, knowing at the edge of town, that's where my great-grandma used to serve.
Yeah.
There's still cherries in that town that are African-American cherries, but they don't own that.
Yeah.
in Hopkinsville, there are Killabrews who are African American, and there are Killabrews that are as white as the driven snow.
And Killabrews are in this book.
Exactly. And they're not like related.
Yeah.
But they're here. That is a walking, living history that exists in front of our eyes.
Well, speaking of the related, so that's the interesting thing about this too. Because of the nature of that lady contacting me on Ancestry, it's because we are related.
Right.
Because of DNA being shared. Like I said, I'm far more, people looking at me wouldn't be able to tell just how genetically mixed I am. I jokingly say I'm almost as white as my kids. Because I'm 30-something% European, like DNA alone. Yeah. So
that's a good book.
I mean, I'm almost as white as my kids. by Dr. K.A.W. Richeé. Coming soon to a publisher near you.
Lessons in miscegenation.
But I mean, that's a real thing that, like, as I talk about, I mean, realizing that, like, we are related. And so when I saw that and saw Higgs, I didn't know that, but I'm sitting there, there's some Higgs around here. And I know that my dad's family, you've got Tennessee, Greenville, all this areas where they were owned more or less. And so I'm wondering, like, are these Higgs that I know, are they like descended from the people who own my family? Hadn't thought this through yet. Because I found myself back in the part of the country where my family kind of is from, at least on my dad's side. It's a thought.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, the story that he shares in here about the lady that writes the memoir, and addresses by name the fact that, hey, I'm black, but I have a white ancestor. How do you think that happened?
Yeah.
And that being a, thing in town, and it just being kind of passed over.
Yeah.
Let's just not think about that. Let's not talk about that. So your story, her story, and then countless other stories, and it's like, okay, we're going to have to wrestle with that. We're going to have to talk about it. We're going to have to figure out, and it's going to take, I think, conversation to do it, but we're going to have to figure out, where do we go from here?
I think a data point that I saw, I can't remember where I saw it at, was said that if you actually look at it, on average, statistically, your average black person in America is about 20 to 25% European DNA.
Yeah.
And that's not because they had a bunch of loving marriages.
Right.
And consensual unions.
No.
And that's the reality of it.
Sex trafficking, rape.
Yeah.
And those are things that we don't want to talk about. Those are things that don't get often mentioned. Later on, I think in the next chapter, or it's probably the next chapter, we talk about Sally Hemings and things like that.
Man.
Yeah. So
I think it is. It's in
this one. Oh yeah, no, it's in starting on page 31.
It's in this page?
Yeah.
Just right before we get into chapter 2.
So, I mean, you think these are things you don't want to talk about. Think about for how long in history no one knew the name Sally Hemings. Right. And it's only been since the 1970s that it's been confirmed. And then even maybe a little bit after that, I don't know if you've seen these documentaries, these biographicals, or all these, but Jefferson, he had a little room beside his bedroom where he kept her.
Yeah.
Where he could go in and have his way whenever he wanted. And I think there's been this sort of historical romanticization of that relationship. But at the same time, she was his property, and he was the master.
I will say, if you are willing to read one of the, probably I think the longest book I've ever read, it took me like 4 years to finish it. It's a huge book. But The Hemingses of Monticello, I forget the name of the lady who wrote it. That is a very good detailed, that's like this book, but on one family. It goes back to Sally Hemings's, I want to say, great-grandmother, it starts with. And it traces the story of that family. Like, her brother, James Hemings, for example, he was the first professionally French-trained chef in the American colonies.
Right.
Sally and her brother were taken to France when Jefferson was the ambassador over there. And he was properly trained. And it works through the psychological, like, we don't have the records, but could you imagine psychologically, why would two black people who were free in France, on the verge of the French Revolution, they knew what freedom was. They were talking about this. These two black individuals voluntarily chose to come back and be slaves in America. And she deals with that, like, why? Why would they choose this? Why would they do this? Why did they come back and not stay there? What is this connection they had to America that made them choose to come back? James ended up eventually committing suicide. Really? Eventually.
So it probably wasn't love.
Well, they talk about familial love and commitment to family.
Was it like Nightingale syndrome?
We don't know for sure. But James didn't have any of those reasons, and he came back. I mean, and he had a lot of freedom. Like he could just roam the country, literally the whole country. And just when Jefferson sent him a letter saying, hey, I want my chef to be at the house, he had to drop what he was doing and come back. But aside from that, he could just do whatever he wanted. He was free to roam the world almost. And he ended up eventually, he was invited to be his personal chef in the White House when he won the presidency. And that's when James committed suicide.
Wow.
Like the struggle when when he talks about the missing documents of the history, like all we have is the story that we can put together. We don't have what was going on, but you can only imagine like,
what's the story about?
Like was he sitting there saying, I should have just stayed in France? Like this is as good as my life's going to get. Like we don't know, but these are the stories and that's what I like about this book, because it's doing that with here in Hopkinsville, because I've had a hard time like equating to and rationalizing, grabbing on to the black experience of Hopkinsville. Like, and that might sound crazy, like a black man in Hopkinsville, because it's not at all.
It's different black.
Yeah. My experience as a black man from Southern California, it was nothing like this. Yeah. It has been so strange and weird to me. And this book really helped me to understand what's going on.
And from my perspective, I'd love to hear from Brandon's perspective of being from Oregon, being from Utah, being here now twice.
And Idaho. He picked all the whitest places to grow up.
That is true. And now you're in one of the blackest places in Kentucky. Coincidence? I think not. Yes. And this place is eerily similar to where I grew up. Yeah. The big difference is I don't have the emotional baggage or the history here. So I'm able to look at it from outside eyes, but also understand this is a lot like the community that I grew up, except there was less black people where I grew up. But I'm looking through it. This is a different kind of community, especially even from 30 minutes south of here. If you're looking at Clarksville, it's just another world almost.
Yeah. Well, I think there's some similarities because you are right. Yeah. Oregon, Idaho, Utah.
Yeah.
That's about as wide as it gets. And you look at that and you say, okay, or I looked at that rather. I looked at that and said, well, racism is not an issue in Oregon, Idaho, and Utah. I just didn't think it was. But what it was is the same basic thing that's happened here, I think, is we just want to paper over it. We want to ignore it. Yeah. But when push comes to shove, there's those moments. And I saw it. Yeah. I didn't realize at the time what I was seeing, but I saw it growing up. I heard it growing up. But because it was not being, I hate to say it, but because I just didn't see any black people,
right?
Then it was never top of mind.
Sure.
Right. Yeah. But then going back later or in Utah as somebody who was there, just 5 years ago, and I had kind of that eye-opening moment of, oh, wait, this is still a thing.
Right.
And so that was actually helpful then coming back here and having a better understanding of, wait, this is not a Hopkinsville problem.
Yeah.
Right.
This is a nationwide problem.
Yeah.
That's true.
And if we are here and we're ignoring it, that's going to take maybe another level of ignorance.
Yeah.
But we can ignore it anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Given the chance, given the opportunity. And so having the conversation over this book about Hopkinsville, I think there's still these conversations that need to happen in Oregon. You guys know, you watched my eyes open this morning when you told me the history of my birth state.
Yeah.
I did not even have a clue. And so that just tells me, wait, this ignorance goes deeper than just, I grew up in a place where there weren't a lot of black people. It goes deeper to the point where I was willfully ignorant over a fact that you guys knew, and you've never lived in Oregon.
I will say, there's, so, and again, the book by Barry, he's quoting another author, I want to say it's Ernest Gaines, a black man who wrote, it's a fiction story. And I think this is good, what we're talking about the things that we're seeing here and the things that we're not seeing. And he was giving this analogy in this scene where this black guy who's from the community, been there 70 some odd years, he was talking about the things that he no longer sees that used to be there, like thinking about like Crispus Attucks and the culture stuff that's going to come out later in this book. And he's lecturing this guy, and the guy's like, well, I don't see it either. He's like, no, you don't see. Because for you to don't see what I don't see, you have to have lived here and been here for all these. You weren't here to see it when it was here.
That's right.
So you can't now don't see it when it's not here.
It doesn't. You don't see it as much as I don't see it, because I saw it before you couldn't see it.
And this book is helping me to see the things so that I can now begin to don't see with the other people here and understand more what's going on.
And don't see it with appreciation that I don't see it.
Yeah. It's a
You
thing.
guys have lost me in all of these double negatives. I'm not seeing what you're not seeing.
That's exactly the point. That's the point.
It's kind of like in the original White Man Can't Jump. Like you can listen to it, but you can't hear it.
Yeah. I hate they're remaking that. Okay, well here, that's it. For you guys who are watching and listening, thank you for putting up with us. We're going to be back with the second. We're going to actually chapter 2 is going to be a 2-parter because it's twice as long as chapter 1, and it's got a lot of stuff. So thank you guys for listening and watching, and please tune in for the next one.